what if the constitution of your country, right, like the voting system you participate in, the laws you follow, the very flag you salute, what if all of that is mathematically defying the laws of the universe?
It's a massive question. And I mean, what if there is a mechanical, verifiable proof that this entire modern framework is just, an illusion?
Yeah. Welcome to the deep dive, because we are looking at a set of incredibly dense blueprints today that claim exactly that.
Right.
We have this massive architectural layout of ancient texts, theological charts, and systemic audits. And this includes files specifically labeled Islam-secularism.pdf and closinginstructions.pdf.
Yeah, these are intense documents.
They really are. So our mission today for you, the listener, is profound. We are going to unpack a radical mathematical audit of modern governance.
We're basically comparing two entirely different operating systems for human society.
Exactly. It's the modern secular nation-states versus the structural framework of Deen-e-Islam.
But before we jump in, we should probably give a quick disclaimer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you should know. These sources contain highly charged political and, well, theological arguments.
Right.
Our goal today is not to take a side, endorse a viewpoint, or tell you what to believe at all. We are simply acting as your guides, impartially unpacking the fascinating concepts, frameworks, and proofs contained directly in these documents so you can explore them for yourself.
It is a really vital framework to establish right out of the gate, because what we are analyzing today doesn't just critique political policy.
No.
It audits the entire foundation of human reality. I mean, we are moving past the superficial arguments of left versus right or, capitalist versus socialist.
Right, way past that.
Yeah, we're looking at the foundational mechanics of how human beings establish authority on Earth.
Exactly. And to even begin to understand this audit, we have to start by completely redefining a word that I, and probably most of you listening, thought we had a solid grasp on.
The word Deen.
Yes, Deen.
Yeah.
Because when I hear Deen in a Western or, modern context, my brain instantly translates it to religion.
Which is how it's almost always used today.
Right. I think of private rituals, going to a mosque or a church, praying, fasting, reading scripture. But the analysis we're looking at insists this is a massive mistranslation.
A structural error.
Yeah. It claims that reducing Deen to mere religion is like the first major systemic error.
And the structural breakdown in the documents maps this out very clearly. If we look at the blueprints for Deen-e-Islam, it is never, ever defined merely as a religion.
Never.
No. It is defined as a complete unified code of life, and this code is structurally bifurcated.
Okay, bifurcated, like split in two.
Right. Imagine a line drawn straight down the center of human existence. On one side of that line, you have individual life, which is the private affairs. And on the other side, you have collective life, the public and systemic affairs.
Okay, let's unpack those two sides, because this is crucial. Let's start with the individual life.
Oh.
The charts indicate that this private domain consists of myths, dogmas, rituals, and modes of worship. So this is basically what the modern world technically classifies as religion.
Correct. The private sphere is your internal belief system. It's how you pray, how you fast, the theology you hold in your heart.
Right.
But Deen-e-Islam does not stop at the door of your house or your place of worship. It crosses the line into the collective life.
Into the public square.
Exactly. This public domain consists of the political, social, and economic systems of a state. It dictates how the economy functions, how justice is administered, how laws are legislated. It is the full, comprehensive operating system for society.
Okay, to ground this, let's bring in a really specific historical anchor provided in our materials, because it perfectly illustrates the boundaries of that private domain.
Ah, the quote from 1947.
Yeah, this is regarding the birth of Pakistan. This is the verbatim historical quote from COPIED Deen-e-Islam, delivered on August 11th, 1947.
Let's hear it.
He says, "You are free. You are free to go to your temples, you are free to go to your mosques, or to any other places of worship in this state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state."
It's a famous quote.
Right. And initially that sounds like a totally standard secular declaration of religious freedom.
Yeah.
But how does this specific analysis interpret that quote?
Well, if we examine that quote through the lens of the Deen chart we just talked about, COPIED Deen-e-Islam is perfectly articulating the private dimension of Deen-e-Islam.
Just the private side.
Exactly. The analysis links this directly to Quranic verse 2.256, which states, "Let there be no compulsion in religion."
So he is basically affirming the absolute freedom of the individual life domain. Like you want to be Christian, Hindu, Shia, Sunni, atheist.
That is your private affair.
Right. There's zero structural compulsion. You are protected.
Precisely. In the private sphere, freedom of belief is structurally guaranteed by the natural law of Deen-e-Fitrat, Deen-e-Islam. The state has no jurisdiction over your heart or your private rituals. Wow, okay.
But this is exactly where the profound divergence happens. Because what happens to the collective affair?
Yeah, what happens to the business of the state?
Exactly.
Because if the state says, we don't care about your private religion, what code is the state itself actually running on?
And that's the million-dollar question.
The material argues that modern secularism essentially hijacked this private affair principle. Like, it looked at the Islamic concept of 2.256, no compulsion in private belief, copied it, and then fundamentally severed it from the rest of the system.
It is a systemic amputation. I mean, secularism says, yes, keep your private rituals. We will protect your right to go to your mosque or temple. But then it draws a hard line and decrees. However, the collective law of the land, the economic machinery, the political structure, those no longer belong to divine law. We are replacing that half of the system.
Okay, let me try an analogy to see if I'm tracking the mechanics of this. Think of it like a smartphone operating system.
Okay, I like that. The blueprints are essentially saying that you can customize your personal apps however you want. You want the prayer app, the fitness app, the meditation app that represents your private beliefs.
Right.
First 2.256.
Right.
You have total freedom to download whatever you want. But the foundational operating system, like the iOS or Android code that actually runs the phone, manages the battery, dictates the security protocols, and routes the data that collective law has to run on a unified natural code, which is Deen-e-Fitrat, Deen-e-Islam.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. I mean, secularism allows you to keep all your personalized apps, but it completely rips out the foundational operating system and replaces it with the completely different man-made code.
It just swaps the OS.
Yeah. And the structural consequences of this substitution are severe. The analysis highlights two specific verses, 3.19 and 3.85, to explain why this partial adoption is mathematically and structurally rejected.
Okay, so verse 3.19 says, "For Allah, Islam is the only deen." And 3.85 says, "Whomsoever wishes to adopt any deen other than Islam, Allah will not accept it." But I want to make sure I understand the mechanics here, not just the theology. Like, why is it rejected? If someone is still praying 5 times a day, still fasting, still keeping their private apps running perfectly, why does the system crash?
Because of partial obedience?
Partial obedience.
Yeah. If you acknowledge the divine architecture in the mosque, but actively deny it in the parliament, in the judicial courts, and in the banking sector, you have fractured the operating system.
Oh.
You are adopting Islam merely as a ritual, a myth, or a private dogma. You are reducing a universal collective code into a localized personal sect.
So it's not a complete deen anymore.
Exactly. The mechanics of Deen-e-Fitrat, Deen-e-Islam require total systemic integration. If you reject its collective systemic laws, the entire framework is compromised.
Okay, so if Deen-e-Fitrat, Deen-e-Islam is this complete unified operating system of nature, what exactly is the counterfeit operating system that replaced it? It's like if they ripped out the original collective code, what did they install in its place?
That leads us directly into the systemic anatomy of secularism. The documents define secularism in incredibly stark mechanical terms. They actually call it the one-eyed religion of a godless world.
Wow. One-eyed religion.
Yeah.
That implies it's structurally blind to half of reality.
Yes.
Like it sees the material, the private, but is entirely blind to the divine collective order.
Precisely. And this is where the prime difference is established. It all comes down to a specific phrasing regarding authority.
Okay.
In Deen-e-Fitrat, Deen-e-Islam, the law of the land is in the name of Allah. But in secularism, the law of the land is in the name of the country-state flag god idol.
This is the crux of the entire structural audit, isn't it?
Yeah.
We really need to look closely at the mechanics of authority here, because human beings cannot simply pass laws in a vacuum.
No, they can't.
Authority has to be anchored to something absolute, or at least something perceived as absolute.
Yeah.
If you remove Allah as the anchor for the law of the land, you are mathematically and legally forced to invent a replacement anchor.
Yeah.
You can't just have a legal system floating in midair.
Right. And that replacement anchor is the country-state flag god idol.
But I need to push back here, representing the skeptic. Because if you walk up to an average person on the street and tell them they worship the country-state flag god idol, they're going to laugh in your face.
They absolutely will.
They'll say, it's just a piece of cloth. It's a symbol of my home. I don't pray to it. I don't sacrifice animals to it. How is it an idol?
And it's a completely fair objection if you define idolatry only through the lens of ancient primitive rituals. But the analysis defines idolatry systemically.
Systemically, okay.
Yes. An idol is any entity, real or fabricated, that you grant ultimate sovereign authority to over your life, your wealth, and your obedience.
Oh, wow.
The blueprint lays out the sequence of this modern idolatry very clearly. First, the state itself is conceptualized as the false god.
The state.
Right. It is an intangible, abstract concept that demands absolute obedience, taxation, and even the sacrifice of your life in war.
Okay, but you can't read an abstract state's mind. Like, a concept can't physically hand you a list of rules. So how does this false god actually communicate?
That brings us to the second link in the sequence. The Constitution serves as the holy book of this system.
The holy book.
Yes. It contains the principles and the working policies, acting as the ultimate textual authority, entirely replacing the Quran. It is the sacred text of the state.
But again, an abstract concept and a book of paper can't physically manifest authority. You need a focal point, right? You need a symbol to anchor the psychology of the masses.
Exactly. And that is the third link. The physical flag. The flag is the material country, state, flag, god, idol.
The material anchor.
Yes. Because the state is an invisible concept, the human psychological architecture requires a physical object to salute, to revere, to stand for, and to direct their absolute loyalty toward. It serves as the tangible idol for the godless world. It is the physical manifestation of the state's claim to sovereignty.
And then there's the fourth link, which actually executes the power. Taghut.
Taghut, yes. In this structural context, Taghut refers to the parliaments, the politicians, the legislators.
The lawmakers.
Right. They act as the physical mouthpiece for the country, state, flag, god, idol. Because, the flag is just dyed fabric and cannot speak, and the state is an abstraction. The Taghut legislate in its name. They claim the right to invent laws, alter morality, and extract wealth from the population, claiming this authority comes from the state.
So let me just trace this mechanical sequence so I have it straight. The state is the abstract false god.
Yes.
The Constitution is its holy book. The physical flag is the country, state, flag god, idol. And the Taghut are the high priests or mouthpieces legislating on its behalf.
That's exactly it.
That is a completely functioning, self-contained alternative operating system. And the texts dive incredibly deep into the psychology of this, specifically regarding where a citizen's allegiance actually lies.
The structural contrast they draw is profound. In secularism, the analysis states that the oath is essentially given to idle wind, which they equate with Iblis, or Satan, because it is based on arrogance and rebellion against natural law.
Okay.
And the practical allegiance of the citizen is strictly to the country, state, flag, god, idol, which the text explicitly labels as a symbol of Iblis, referencing verse 4.117.
Contrast that with the system of Deen-e-Islam, where the oath is given directly to Allah, the ever-living, and the practical allegiance is given to the Khalifa.
Right.
The human leader, tasked merely with implementing the natural system, not inventing his own laws. But let's look at the Constitution again, because the sources launch a really fascinating legal critique of it. They claim that a secular constitution actually lacks baseline legal authority.
Yes.
Why? Because there is no true man-to-man contract. They reference verses 2.282 and 17.34, which deal with contracts being clearly written, agreed upon, and witnessed between actual living parties.
Which a constitution is not.
Might have to play devil's advocate here again. What about the social contract? John Locke, Rousseau, the whole foundation of Western democracy is that by living in a society, using the roads, enjoying the protection of the police, I am implicitly agreeing to the Constitution. I might not have signed a piece of paper, but my participation is my signature. How does the analysis dismantle that?
The analysis dismantles the social contract theory by looking at the pure mechanics of consent and jurisdiction. A contract, by definition under natural law, referencing verse 2.282, requires mutual, explicit agreement between living parties.
Living parties.
Right. A constitution is drafted by people who are entirely dead. You, as a citizen born today, never signed it. You were born into a geographic boundary, and an abstract entity, the state, claimed ownership over your legal status before you could even speak.
Yeah, that's true.
There was no direct, verifiable contract between you and the state. Instead, the Constitution operates by artificially dividing humanity into completely fabricated legal categories: citizens versus non-citizens.
It creates borders and divisions based on imaginary lines drawn by colonial powers or historical wars.
Exactly.
Whereas Deen-e-Fitrat, Deen-e-Islam, is based on universal human brotherhood. It recognizes people based on their ideological adherence, believers or non-believers, regardless of geography. It is a completely different paradigm of human belonging.
And this entirely redefines the concept of sovereignty. In the secular system, sovereignty supposedly belongs to the people and is executed by the Taqat, which is the mechanism of democracy.
Right, we the people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the texts reference verse 6.116 to warn against following the majority if they deviate from natural law, because the majority can be easily manipulated.
Oh, totally.
In contrast, in Deen-e-Fitrat Deen-e-Islam, absolute sovereignty belongs to Allah alone, as per verse 12.4. The lawgiver is Allah, not the Taqat.
I want to spend a moment on the psychological conditioning here, because earlier I mentioned taqwa and tawhid. Let's explain how those function systemically compared to modern patriotism. Like, how does patriotism actually replace taqwa?
Let's break down the mechanisms. Taqwa is often translated as God consciousness. Systemically, it acts as an internal, self-regulating anti-corruption mechanism.
Okay, self-regulating.
Yeah, if you possess taqwa, you believe you are constantly observed by an absolute just authority. You don't steal even if the cameras are off, because your accountability is eternal.
Right, you're accountable to Allah.
Exactly. Patriotism structurally replaces this. It conditions the citizen to be conscious of the state. Your morality is defined by what is legal or illegal according to the state, not what is universally just.
And nationalism replaces tawhid, because tawhid is the absolute unity of God, the idea that all of humanity operates under one single unified divine law.
Yes.
Nationalism shatters tawhid. It says, no, humanity is divided into 195 competing factions, each with its own country-state flag god idol, and my idol is superior to your idol.
It is a one-for-one substitution of the entire spiritual and systemic architecture.
And this brings us to how this secular system actually functions mechanically day to day. How does this system generate its laws? Because the analysis is highly critical of the democracy mechanism itself.
Very critical.
Yes, I want to talk about the donkey analogy. The sources use this striking, almost brutal metaphor to describe the mechanics of democracy. It says, voting for a writer like donkeys, 200 donkeys cannot think like a human.
It's a provocative image. I mean, it really is. But it highlights a very specific structural critique. The argument is that gathering millions of uninformed, psychologically conditioned, or heavily manipulated individuals, the donkeys, in the analogy doesn't magically produce higher intelligence or natural law.
Right.
Aggregating ignorance does not produce wisdom. It merely creates a facade of consensus to legitimize whoever happens to be the writer.
And the text says this writer-master holds absolute power. Once elected, the Taku can do whatever they want. They make laws according to the wish list of what the documents call the predator elite, referencing verse 36.6 here, classifying them as Satanists. And they pass these laws in the name of the country-state flag god idol, specifically to enslave mankind and, as the text bluntly puts it, suck their blood.
Let's look at the real-world implications of that sucking blood analogy. I mean, how does a system extract life force from its population?
Taxes.
Through taxation, inflation, and debt. If we extrapolate from the sources, they are framing modern citizens as individuals who are living, dying, and worshiping the country-state flag god idol. They reference verses 51.56 and 6.162.
Worshiping, like in a literal sense.
Worshipping in this systemic context means obeying out of absolute love and fear. People spend their entire life force working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to pay taxes to a state that might use that money to fund wars they disagree with or bail out the predator elite. They are pleasing the state apparatus entirely instead of Allah.
They're essentially saying that we have been psychologically conditioned from birth through the school system and the media to sacrifice our wealth, our labor, and even our children in foreign wars for a piece of fabric and an imaginary line on a map, while completely ignoring the universal laws of nature.
Yes.
It is a matrix-level critique of reality. So, if this secular democratic model is structurally flawed, if it's a counterfeit operating system designed to empower a predator elite, what is the exact mechanical alternative? How does Deen-e-Fitrat Deen-e-Islam actually structure a state without falling into the same traps.
This is where the blueprints move from the diagnostic phase to the engineering phase. The sources mandate what they call a binary structure mechanics for a valid natural constitution.
Binary, meaning it must be explicitly divided into two distinct parts.
Yes. They reference verse 18.26, which states that Allah does not let anyone share in his command. To fulfill this mathematically and structurally, the Constitution must be completely bifurcated.
Okay, let's look at the schematic for this. Part 1 of this Constitution is labeled Immutable Principles. This consists of the Quran and the Sunnah. The text is very clear. These are fixed, absolute metaphysical truths, zero edits allowed.
Because these principles represent the unchangeable constants of nature, you cannot vote to amend them. Just like you cannot hold a parliamentary vote to amend the laws of thermodynamics, they dictate the absolute boundaries of justice, economics, and human rights.
Right. And then you have Part 2 labeled Adaptable Statecraft. This consists of working policies based on rational wisdom and acquired knowledge. This part is fluid.
Extremely fluid.
Yeah, it evolves with time, technology, changing climates, and new circumstances.
Yeah.
And this is the critical systemic catch. Part 2 must remain strictly subordinate to Part 1.
The structural separation here is vital. The analysis explains exactly why you cannot simply take the Quran and merge it into a standard secular unified constitution.
And this was a huge question for me when reading this. Why can't you just take the Quranic laws, copy-paste them into a modern national constitution, call yourself an Islamic republic, and be done with it?
Because of how a unified secular constitution legally functions. The mechanics of a single document mean that every clause inside it shares the same structural authority. If you merge divine eternal law and man-made administrative law into one single document, all the laws inside that document become structurally equal in status.
Okay, let me build an analogy to make sure the mechanics of this are clear. It's like trying to put the laws of physics and the local municipal speed limit into the exact same legal category.
Oh, yeah.
You can absolutely change the speed limit. A city council can vote to change it from 55 to 65 based on traffic data. That's adaptable statecraft. But if you put gravity into the exact same category in the same document, you give a parliament the structural illusion that they have the jurisdiction to hold a vote to repeal gravity.
That is an incredibly precise analogy. If the Quran is just one part of a unified secular constitution, then the parliament, the Tughut, assumes the overarching authority over the entire document. This means they are structurally empowered to add, remove, or amend prohibited laws. For instance, they could vote to legalize riba, which is usury or interest, or alter social regulations like LGBT laws. And they would do this in the name of the country-state flag god idol, not Allah.
Because if the parliament has the power to ratify the Constitution, they implicitly claim they have the power to ratify divine law.
Yeah.
They would be claiming jurisdiction over the Creator's code.
Exactly. And that mechanical act is what the texts define as structural shirk, the ultimate sin of associating partners with God's absolute command. By physically and mathematically separating the mutable working policy, which is Part 2, from the eternal principle in Part 1, you dismantle the authority of the Tughut. You mechanically dismantle the country-state flag god idol. You prove that the state only has administrative power, the power to set speed limits and organize waste collection, not absolute legislative sovereignty over morality and human nature.
So by physically separating the document into two independent pillars, you're physically separating the authority. The Tughut can tinker with traffic laws, zoning ordinances, and tax brackets for infrastructure in Part 2, but they cannot even touch Part 1. It acts as an impenetrable firewall.
Perfectly said.
But this raises a fundamental philosophical question that I really want to challenge. Why can't humans just vote to change these core laws? I mean, if 99% of the global population genuinely wants to legalize riba or change a moral constant, why shouldn't they be able to? Doesn't authority ultimately come from the people?
This brings us to the mathematical argument in the sources about the true nature of human authority. This is one of the most intellectually rigorous parts of the blueprint. The text poses what it calls the delegation paradox.
The delegation paradox.
Right. We need to look at the math of authority. It starts with a simple, undeniable premise. An individual human citizen naturally possesses zero inherent authority to make laws that go against nature or divine constants.
Right. I can't wake up tomorrow and decree that water is no longer wet, that gravity pushes up, or that theft is suddenly a moral good. I don't have the ontological power to alter reality. I have zero authority over the fitrat.
Exactly. You possess zero authority to alter the nature of reality. Therefore, mathematically, the analysis argues that a collection of individuals cannot delegate representative authority to politicians to make laws that they do not inherently possess themselves.
Because 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 0.
Exactly.
Even if you have a billion zeros, a billion people voting, it still equals 0.
Precisely. Aggregating millions of human votes doesn't magically generate the sovereign authority to alter a natural absolute, like the laws of Deen-e-Islam. The math simply does not work. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot delegate authority you never possessed.
That concept completely shatters the entire premise of absolute democratic sovereignty. If the people don't have the power to change nature, they cannot vote to give a politician the power to change nature. The entire system is built on a mathematical impossibility.
And this is exactly why the bypass system, the idolatry we discussed earlier, is structurally necessary.
Oh, because they have to fake it.
Yes, because humans mathematically lack this authority, but still want to pass laws that serve the predator elite. They must construct a psychological illusion. To pass fake laws, to legalize things like riba and systemic exploitation, they must anchor a physical country-state flag god idol and use a Tagut mouthpiece to pretend that the authority has materialized out of nowhere. It is a systemic sleight of hand to bypass the delegation paradox.
This reminds me of a very specific and somewhat surprising point in the sources regarding Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, the famous philosopher and poet. The analysis documents include a very explicit clarification about his views on the modern Western world.
Yes, the text references Dr. Iqbal's observation where he states that the inner core of the present Western civilization is purely Quranic.
Now, at first glance, that seems completely contradictory to everything we've just discussed. How can a civilization running on the country-state flag, god, idol, have a purely Quranic inner core? The sources are incredibly strict about how to interpret this.
They are. The blueprint clarifies that this quote applies only in regards to structural and scientific discipline, what the framework calls acquired knowledge.
Acquired knowledge, okay.
It's about the mechanics of building aircraft, spacecraft, developing medicine, or the administrative machinery of a state.
So the structural discipline of the West aligns with the Quranic principles of observing the universe and utilizing acquired knowledge. They study physics, they respect the laws of aerodynamics, they achieve incredible technological results. But the text explicitly separates Dr. Iqbal's specific quote from the broader, much more vital concept of Deen-e-Haq.
Exactly. The machinery is just a tool. Acquired knowledge tells you how to build a complex global banking network, but it doesn't tell you why or for whom you should build it. The text says that true acquired knowledge, the machinery of society, must be directed by a just ideology, which is Deen-e-Haq.
Right.
And they define the baseline of the system as a social justice framework so profound and that even a dog should not die of thirst.
So we can't conflate the two. A secular state uses the machinery, the acquired knowledge, to empower the predator elite. They build the banking network to extract wealth via riba. Deen-e-Islam would use that exact same technological machinery, that same acquired knowledge, to distribute wealth and establish universal social justice. The West might have the Quranic discipline in engineering, but they lack the Deen-e-Haq ideology to guide it.
Which is why the technological advancements of the secular world so often result in better weapons of war or more efficient tools of economic extraction rather than universal peace. The tool is powerful, but the operating system guiding it is fundamentally corrupt.
Okay, let's bring this down to the ground level. Let's talk about the listener. If the whole system of the country-state flag, god, idol is a fabricated illusion, a mathematical zero, what should our focus actually be?
That's the real question.
Because if I'm looking at the world today, where is the real conflict? Right now, the world seems obsessed with religious wars, sectarian violence, and theological debates.
Well, the sources issue a massive, urgent course correction for the Ummah, the global Muslim community. The directive is blindingly clear. Stop the sectarian infighting immediately.
The documents are heavily critical of how much energy, wealth, and blood is wasted on theological arguments between sects. They explicitly define sectarianism, referencing verse 6.159, and the promotion of nation-state sects, referencing verses 30.313d2, as acts of Tagut.
This is a total paradigm shift. The true enemy, according to the structural framework, isn't historical religions like Christianity or Hinduism, and it certainly isn't different sects within Islam like Shia or Sunni.
Right, because of what we established at the beginning.
Exactly. Remember the bifurcation of deen. Those theological differences fall squarely under the private affairs domain. Verse 2.256 protects them. Let there be no compulsion. You cannot legislate belief.
So if arguing about private rituals is a distraction, what is the real war?
The real war, the current ideological war, is strictly with Deen-e-secularism and the systemic collective oppression it enforces globally.
And the ultimate weapon of that oppression, the primary tool of the predator elite, according to the text, is riba, usury, the global interest-based economic system. The Quran literally defines riba as a war with Allah in verse 2.279.
It does.
I want to linger on this mechanism for a moment. Why is riba considered the ultimate evil in this framework?
Because of how it functions mechanically. Riba allows the predator elite to extract the life force, the labor, and wealth of the population without producing any actual value. It is mathematically designed to funnel wealth upward, ensuring that the rich get richer simply by holding capital, while the poor are perpetually enslaved by debt. It is the systemic mechanism of sucking blood.
So while the Ummah is currently distracted, fighting over the minutiae of private rituals, arguing over how to position their hands during prayer, or labeling one another as kafir or non-believers over theological nuances, the predator elite are laughing.
They absolutely are.
They use the country-state flag god idol as their first line of defense to keep the Ummah divided by artificial borders. They say, look, you are a Pakistani Muslim and he's an Afghan Muslim, you must fight for your flag. They use nationalism to keep the population fractured, while the global riba system quietly enslaves everyone across all borders.
It is the ultimate sleight of hand. It's focusing intensely on the apps on your phone, arguing over which color the app icon should be, while a malicious operating system is actively draining the battery, stealing your data, and destroying the hardware.
Wow.
The true struggle is structural, it is systemic. It's about dismantling the idol that allows the economic and political oppression to exist in the first place.
Why should you, the listener, care about this? Why does this matter if you're just trying to pay your mortgage and raise your kids? Because this framework explains why you feel like you're constantly running on a treadmill. It explains why your taxes fund systems, wars, and bailouts you morally oppose, yet you feel completely powerless to stop it. The system is mechanically designed to extract from you while offering the illusion of control through the delegation paradox.
Which brings us to the culmination of the documents, the ultimate 360-degree philosophical proof presented in the closing instructions.
This is the big one.
We have diagnosed the problem, we have outlined the mechanical alternative, but the analysis doesn't just stop at theory. It provides a laboratory-grade proof.
Yes, and this is where it gets incredibly deep. I want to spend significant time on this because it is the intellectual peak of the entire deep dive.
The discussion here culminates in what the texts call the absolute fact of nature. The premise is this: Allah's laws cannot be replaced without the invention of a false god.
And they back this up using a specific verse. Surah Fusilat, verse 41.53, which says, "We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth."
Right.
The texts use this verse as an empirical laboratory proof, dividing it into two dimensions: horizons, which they translate as external mechanics, and selves, which they translate as internal logic. Let's break this down meticulously, starting with the external mechanics, the horizons.
The external proof uses a brilliant analogy regarding physics. Think about how a shadow works. A shadow cannot manifest in the physical world on its own. It is an absence of light. Therefore, a shadow absolutely requires a physical object to block the light source.
Wait, let me make sure I follow the mapping of this analogy.
Yeah.
The light is natural law, Deen-e-Islam.
Yes.
What is the shadow?
The shadow is the fake law, a law against nature, like the legalization of riba or the division of humanity through borders. Just as a shadow needs an object to exist, a fake law cannot manifest legally or structurally without an anchor blocking the truth. Passing fake laws against nature requires anchoring a physical country-state flag god idol.
Oh, I see.
You need the physical idol, the flag, the state apparatus to cast the legal shadow. Without the physical object blocking the light, the shadow vanishes instantly.
That makes perfect sense mechanically. You can't have the fake law without the fake idol to authorize it. Now, what about the internal logic, the selves? How does this manifest psychologically inside the human mind?
This connects directly back to the delegation paradox we spent so much time on earlier, because an individual inherently knows they have zero right to legislate against nature. They know they cannot change the speed of light or the moral reality of theft. They know they cannot delegate that right to a politician. 0 plus 0 equals 0.
Right.
So internally, psychologically, humans are forced to invent a fiction to cope with their rebellion.
It's cognitive dissonance on a species-wide level. We know we aren't gods. We know we don't have the authority to alter the fitrat. So we build a false god, the abstract state, and we pretend it has the sovereign authority, and then we pretend it gave us the authority through democracy.
Exactly. You have to invest fake sovereign authority into an inanimate state idol to bypass your own internal psychological knowledge that you lack the right to change the laws of the universe. The internal self requires the illusion just as much as the external horizon requires the shadow.
And this leads to the ultimate verification, the empirical proof that brings everything together. The documents state that this sequence, the country-state flag god idol, leading to the Takhut mouthpiece, leading to the fake law, is a rigid mechanical law of cause and effect.
It is as mechanical as a gear turning another gear.
So here is the explosive conclusion of the text, and I want to make sure I state this clearly. The sources argue that we can run a structural experiment.
A thought experiment, really.
Yeah. If you mechanically subtract the country-state flag god idol, which you achieve via that mathematical separation of the Constitution we talked about, splitting it into part 1 and part 2, isolating the divine law from the administrative law, the entire counterfeit legislative sequence instantly collapses.
It shatters. Remove the anchor and the shadow disappears. Remove the idol and the Takhut loses its voice. It can no longer claim divine jurisdiction. And if the Takhut loses its voice, the fake laws, the riba, the systemic exploitation, the predator elite's wish list lose their imaginary jurisdiction over human life.
And the proof.
Because it is physically, mathematically, and structurally impossible to pass a false law without first inventing a false god to authorize it, this inevitable collapse provides undeniable, empirical, observable proof.
Proof of what?
Proof that Allah exists and that the Quran is the absolute truth, or HAQ. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the natural order, Deen-e-Islam, is the only mathematically and structurally sound operating system for human reality. Anything else mathematically equals zero. Anything else requires a manufactured, idolatrous delusion to sustain itself.
Wow. We have taken an absolutely massive journey today.
We really have.
From COPIED-Islam's vision of private freedom and the mistranslation of the word deen, all the way to the mechanical anatomy of secularism. We've dismantled the social contract, explored the mathematical impossibility of democracy's delegation paradox, and finally arrived at this empirical, physics-level proof of divine authority.
It is a lot to process.
There's a profound audit of everything we assume to be normal about modern governance. It challenges us to look past the symbols, to look past the apps on the phone, and ask who actually wrote the operating system and by what right do they rule.
It demands that we stop treating governance as a popularity contest and start treating it as a matter of structural engineering and natural law.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over. A perspective that wasn't explicitly debated today but builds directly on this foundation.
What is it?
Well, the text mentioned that Mother Nature always seeks efficiency. It always moves toward unity, whether you are looking at the subatomic level, the biological level, or the cosmic level. The universe operates on one single unbreakable code.
Right.
Yet, human-made borders and flags create deliberate duplication, massive friction, and endless war, specifically designed to empower a predator elite. So, if nature strictly operates under one unified, efficient code, why do we continue to accept a world shattered into hundreds of competing, artificial sovereign idols? Why do we accept the friction when the massive unity is staring us in the face?
It's a question that demands we look at the blueprints of our own reality and ask if we are building a house that can actually stand.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly intense deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep examining the blueprints, keep looking for the mechanisms behind the illusions, and most importantly, keep exploring the sources for yourself. Until next time.